Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So today we're going to get another episode in the best Teknoparrot arcade racing games to play, because the reality is Teknoparrot has a metric crap ton of arcade racing games you can check out, and I'm on the 4th video in this series and I still have one to go. And we're starting off with the Fast and the Furious Supercars. And in the previous episodes I talked about some of the other Fast and the Furious games, but this one might be my favorite as far as the arcade franchise is concerned. And even if it has the Fast and the Furious licensing, and it does have some of the cars from the movie, this really is just another Cruisin' USA game from Raw Thrills that doesn't have the license because they had to wait until Cruisin' Blast to get it back. And if you're not aware, Raw Thrills is basically just comprised of some of the ex-developers from Midway when they shut down, so this really is just an unofficial cruising game down to the bikini girl holding the trophy at the end. This one is just over the top and it has the best courses of any Fast and the Furious game in my opinion. It's just so much fun and it really does kind of personify what I love about arcade racing games, whether they're from Raw Thrills, Midway, Namco, Sega, or otherwise. Just the absolute over-the-top driving and drifting, the impossible jumps, going through an entire volcano and driving through lava perfectly safely. It does have some Fast and Furious vibes just in the fact that it is completely unlike real life, and a lot of the things you see in the game would not work outside of a movie or a video game. I'd say the first-person view maybe not my favorite, but does give a great sense of speed, and this just is one of those games. Every time I play it, it 100% makes me happy. It has that arcade racing that I know, love, and remember. And that's really all I'm ever asking for from an arcade racing game, especially a modern one. I want it just to be completely unrealistic and over the top, because we don't get many arcade racing games on home consoles. It is still the domain of the arcade. And something like the Fast and the Furious Supercars here, every single time I play it, I just have a blast with it. It's one of those games you can spend 25 minutes, see every single course, and then just walk away. And I can't recommend enough, if you want to get into these racing games, grab yourself a wheel and pedal set. I use a Logitech G920 with the pedals, and it just gives me every single thing I need. Sure, it's not going to feel exactly like an arcade racing cabinet, but if you want to play dozens upon dozens of games with as close to the perfect setup as you can get, having a wheel and a pedal just 100% makes the fundamental difference. So definitely think about getting one, and if you do use a wheel, tell me down below what you're using, because I would be curious. I've been thinking about upgrading my wheel, but I don't really want to drop all that cash on it. It's one of those things, it works well enough, it gets the job done, and the next step up, you're talking into almost the 4 figures if you want to get a good racing setup going. But even if you just use a standard analog controller, something like the Fast and Furious Supercars just gives you all of that arcade racing intensity and action you're craving in 30 minutes or less. And that's why I love these games in and of themselves. I don't always have a ton of time to play a video game, so an arcade game that's 30 minutes or less just gives me all of that gaming satisfaction, and I can move on with whatever else my day requires, either making these videos or just being a real life adult with actual responsibilities. Now moving over to another game, I previously talked about this in a different episode, but this is Daytona USA 3 New Season Edition. This is a slight upgrade to the base Daytona USA 3, which they basically dropped the 3 from. It's going to have some new courses as well as some courses from the original games remade, and even though they won't say that this is Chicago on the actual game listing, this is 100% the city I live in, and this one is a ton of fun. It isn't as good as Daytona USA or Daytona USA 2 is in my opinion, but it still has all the charm and all of the fun, and on New Season Edition you get a different handling characteristic that I think does a lot better job of controlling the vehicle than the standard game. And I'm just playing this in ultra wide screen right now because it will support 21:9 if your monitor supports that. It kind of just gives it a slightly different look that I kind of vibe with. But the good thing is I'm pretty sure not many people know about this game as far as New Season Edition is concerned. I know a decent amount of you know that there's a Daytona USA 3, and the first game kind of got decent reviews but not the best, and New Season Edition fixed up a lot of complaints with the game, including ones I had on my initial review probably like 3 years ago. And again, even if they won't say it on the course listing, this is 100% the South Loop of Chicago going into the loop, and I could be there in about 30 minutes if I just hopped on the train. And of course it has a great soundtrack and it's stuck in my head, and I'm going to make sure you're thinking about Daytona USA all day long. So here's your soundtrack sample, and I'll be right back with more. And I'm sorry, but you're going to be humming that all day long just like I am, because every single time I talk about Daytona USA in a video for the next week, I'm just basically humming the music to myself even if I don't notice. I love the colorways in this game. I love all of the lighting models. It really just is a metric crap ton of fun, and honestly, you know, anything Daytona is going to hit for me. And if you've never played this game before, I can't recommend it enough. And like everything else I said, a wheel and pedal set is definitely going to make a difference, especially if you have force feedback in it, because you can enable that in Teknoparrot and really give yourself as close to the feel of having a real arcade cabinet in your house, except you don't have the space like me because you live in a 1,200 square foot condo in the city of Chicago. So definitely check out New Season Edition. It is a ton of fun, like an 8.5 out of 10. Now moving over to a Namco game, because we've already spotlit Sega here as well as Rothrills. This is Dead Heat Riders, and in a previous video I talked about Dead Heat, and that was an arcade racing game featuring cars. This is basically a pseudo remake slash reimagining of the same game, but now we have motorcycles with a completely different handling characteristic. You're going to have a lot of the same tracks, but they are going to make some changes to the track. Some of the turns are going to be different. So if you've already played Dead Heat, maybe Dead Heat Riders isn't something you need to immediately check out, but maybe if you're looking for another fun motorcycle racing game versus a car racing game, it's going to give you just enough to hop back in. And I do love the fact that it kind of feels a little bit like New York City, Gotham City here, in something out of a Tim Burton Batman movie, just with those snowy trees, or at least that's what I see. And this again is Namco making an arcade racing game, which they are good at, but obviously I wish they would come back with a new Ridge Racer for the arcades, because I'm always surprised they make games like this but ignore the fact that they haven't had a Ridge Racer game in arcades for the longest time. So I'm always kind of wondering what Namco's thinking when they're like, hey, let's make a new arcade racing game, and everyone's sitting around the table concepting it, and someone just doesn't say, why don't we just make Ridge Racer 8? I think people really would love that. You can even throw some motorcycles in there if you want to kind of cover the spread. But Dead Heat Riders is a lot of fun, and this is a game that just properly features Chicago, and anytime I see Chicago in an arcade racing game, I want to play it, and I want to talk about it, because it's so much fun seeing your city recreated. But tell me down below, if you live in a major city, what's your favorite arcade racing game that features that city, and how close to reality is it? Because I will say the layout here for Chicago in Dead Heat Riders is so incorrect. You basically have landmarks in all the wrong places, so it is hilarious as you're actually playing, and you'll see there when you get into first place, you actually do have some animations. The game is going to give you 3 nitros, and you have to preserve those for the best spots if you ever want to see a checkered flag, because your competition is stiff and you have to basically just race perfectly if you want to win any of these races. But Dead Heat Riders is a ton of fun. It's also going to be our second track sample for the video, so go ahead and listen for 45 seconds, but don't go anywhere because the next game was released in arcades, but it's a pure sim. But enjoy the music.
Select your city. Chicago. Select your bike. Sports type. Ready?
Solid B-tier soundtrack, but now moving over to another arcade racing game that plays unlike anything I've shown you in this series. This is D1GP. It's developed by Yuke's and produced by Taito, and it basically feels like an offshoot of Taito's own Battle Gear series. This is going to be extremely simmy. We're getting into Gran Turismo levels of realism here. There's going to be a lot of different challenges, a lot of different drifting, and it's going to feel and control completely different than any of the other arcade racing games I've shown you. But I do like these games every once in a while. I'm definitely not a huge sim racing fan. The last Gran Turismo I played was only because it had a VR mode in it. I wanted to check out PSVR 2 inside of it, but as far as sim racing games, I've always tried to enjoy them. They just don't really hit for me the same way that arcade racing does. But tell me down below, are you a sim fan as well? Or are you basically just arcade racing like I am? But the thing about D1GP is, with a wheel and pedal set and the ability to play on your PC, this one actually hits for me because it has some fun challenges. It kind of walks you by the hand and gives you a little bit of a tutorial what the game expects. effects, and it's always fun to play something different. And even though I'm not very good at this game, even with a wheel, it's something that I always pop back into maybe once a year just to give it a couple laps, because I get it, not every single arcade racing game needs to be backflipping cars like the Fast and the Furious Supercars or driving around on motorcycles with nitrous like Dead Heat Riders. You can have games like D1 GP, and people do love those, and it kind of just is that same lineage of battle gear that started its life in arcades and still lives there with new releases. But tell me down below, have you ever played D1 GP or any Battle Gear? I would be curious to find out, because I do have a Battle Gear 2 PCB in my collection that I'm currently wiring up to be able to show you guys on camera and basically get some original captures. But this game is fun, it's fast, and it really does feel unlike anything else I ever show you. And I do understand that there are people out there that are sim fans, and you'll see here I'm absolutely screwing this up. You're basically supposed to stay right behind the car in front of you inside of that box and match the drifts all the way around. It's one of those things I wish I could do it, but I just kind of suck. But it's also got a fun soundtrack, so now we're into the third soundtrack sample category. But don't go anywhere, because I still have one more game to show you in the video. But enjoy the music. I mean, it's like Tokyo Techno Beats for an arcade drifting game, and that just works. We got one more Fast and the Furious game, because holy crap did Rothrills make a lot of these things, and this is the original Fast and Furious Superbikes. So it is the second game in this recommendation video that has motorcycles, not arcade cars. And it's one of those things, I do love motorcycles as well, and this game is just every bit as over the top as Supercars is. It's just a little older, and it kind of has that 4:3 aspect ratio thing going. But just like every other Fast and the Furious game on Teknoparrot and made by Rothrills, it is just another Cruisin' USA game. So if you think about it, we have Cruisin' USA, Cruisin' Blast, Cruisin' Exotica, and Cruisin' World as actual mainline entries, but then you have like 5 different Fast and the Furious games on Rothrills hardware that work in Teknoparrot that basically bring the technical Cruisin' USA franchise up to like 8 games, but only 4 of them actually have the title. And this again is just straight up over the top. None of the jumps in real life you'd be able to make. If you tried to do half of what was in this game, the first time you tried it, you would end up as a puddle of goo and broken bones on the ground any day of the week and twice on Sunday. But of course, arcade games allow you to drive in ways that you only wish you could in real life, and this one is a lot of fun. Sure, it might not hit as much as something like Supercars or Superbikes 2, which I will show you in a different video that has more of that high definition look, but it is just a fun title, and it gives you all the arcade racing goodness that everyone always knows, loves, and remembers. And that really is the thing about these recommendation videos. I understand that not everyone uses Teknoparrot or really even knows about it, and it's one of those things. I love keeping arcade games alive and being able to share them with you in the home, so you can guys just kind of play whatever it is you want whenever you want to. And something like this you might not see that many arcade cabinets for anymore, because it is a slightly older game that you might not run across as much. But if you played any of the Fast and Furious arcade games in arcades, leave me a comment down below and tell me what you thought of them, and tell me if you ever made the connection to Cruisin' USA, because I feel like I made it instantaneously. But it is one of those things, maybe you didn't realize that Rothrills was basically just midway by a new name, with all of the best developers going over to that company, and they still make arcade games to this day. But that's the recommendation list for the best retro games on Teknoparrot 4 that involve racing. But don't worry, I have one more video in this series, and that's because there's so many games to talk about. But I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.